Hey guys, hope all is well. In this video, I'm going to give my take and analysis on Game 6 of the World Championship match between Sergei Karjakin and Magnus Carlsen. I know I'm giving it to you a little bit late. I apologize for that. I've actually been a bit under the weather the past few days, actually since the weekend, really. So it's sort of prevented me from getting behind the screen as much as I'd like to. Yeah, I actually was at the event for Game 6. It was an interesting game, although it was actually a relatively quick game compared to a few of the rounds, like games 3 and 4 before it. So here goes. In this round, Karjakin was white and Carlsen was black, and this was the first of two white games that Karjakin would have. So it was really curious to see how he would respond. So e4 was played. E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, a6. We'd actually seen all of this before because Carlsen had been trotting out the Ruy Lopez with great success, actually, not really having any problems. So we figured, why not do it again? Bishop a4, knight f6, all standard moves thus far. Castles, bishop e7, again, all standard. Rook e1, just protecting the pawn, getting the rook to the e line. b5, bishop b3, and now castles. And this is actually the first interesting point because a typical move like c3 in this position actually introduces introduces the opportunity for the Marshall Gambit with d5 or Marshall attack of the Ruy Lopez, which Carlsen has hadn't actually used in this match, but sort of threatened to use in a way by the move order. I've explored this in the previous video, but the point is that after e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes c6, black quickly starts to play like bishop d6 and queen h4, and for the pawn has a slight lead in development, which proves to be quite a good bit of compensation a lot of the time. So it tends to be fairly drawish at the top level, and if you're black in a World Championship match, you don't necessarily mind that. So as in the previous game, I think Karjakin decided to sort of refuse the Marshall by playing, I think it was by playing a3 or d3. And these are all viable moves. a3 is a viable move, d3 is a viable move, h3 is a viable move. In this position, he actually played h3. And the point is to sort of get a setup that is that's a little bit different than the traditional Marshall structures. And by not playing pawn c3, you leave the option of actually putting the knight on c3. So as a consequence, you sort of at least discourage the notion of this d5 move in one go that black tries to employ in these Marshall setups. Actually, Carlsen, he saw h3 and decided, you know what? I'm going to play bishop b7. The point is just to develop the bishop, sort of get closer to sort of connecting the rooks and doing all that good stuff with development, and then maybe arguing that h3 is a little bit too slow. But the idea is really connected with the next move, because after the next move, d3, which is another very slow, very typical Karjakin move, not trying to show all the cards right away in terms of how he's going to develop his queenside pieces. Now Carlsen decides to seize the chance and plays d5. And now this is actually a pawn sacrifice, because after e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes e5, you don't actually take the knight here because well, it's just not sort of the critical move in this position. You actually play knight d4. And the point is, although black is down a pawn, he's going to secure the bishop on b3. And we always talk about knights being better, that bishops are better than knights, and that if we can trade our knights for a bishop, it's usually really good compensation. And here is no different. And now with this knight d4 move, you also see that the bishop on b7 is uncovered on the diagonal. So all of a sudden, you sort of can imagine this bishop on b7 having a lot to say. And maybe even the bishop on e7, if it ever lands on d6, you'd have two bishops really menacingly pointing at the white king. So this has actually all been played before with this knight d4. Actually, I think I might have played in the game before. But it's actually the pro for white compared to traditional martial setups is that because white hasn't actually played the pawn to c3, the knight can actually come there, and that's a big difference because it just gives white extra options. Karjakin, I'm sure, had seen all this before, and he played knight c3, and again, that's sort of part of the point of delaying the pawn to c3. You actually give the knight its most natural square. And so Carlsen did not hesitate to get that bishop, and so knight take. Well, I thought knight takes b3 was played, but first knight b4 was played, and that's actually sort of clever too. The point is that the bishop is just sitting there and can eventually be recouped, regardless of whether it's this move or the next move. And so, because the bishop on b3 can't really go anywhere otherwise, so knight b4 just sort of keeps more pieces on the board. You don't want to trade the knights because the more pieces get traded, the more that extra pawn from white might actually start to tell and become a serious advantage. So you put the knight on b4, and it's very effective there. Also important to point out why the knight is so effective there. If a move like a3 was played, and this definitely wasn't played, then knight takes b3, and then you'd have to take with the c pawn instead of the a pawn. And white would much rather prefer to take with the a pawn because now the c pawn, white's capturing away from the center, and this d3 pawn is super weak. And then the knight would just go back. But here you could argue that black is actually doing extremely well because for the two bishops, he's still down the pawn, but it's a very weak d pawn. So this would be a great position for black. But after knight b4, Karjakin went bishop f4. Again, just keeping with the plan of developing the pieces and trying to connect the rooks and get something going as quickly as possible against the black pieces. So bishop f4 sort of is in line with that plan, and really the key thing, if white is going to have any advantage holding on to this extra pawn, he's going to have to sort of accelerate his development and play really quickly. And then hopefully if the knight on e5 is able to stick around in the center, then eventually white would love to generate some threats against the black king. So those are the sort of the ideas there. After bishop f4, Carlsen took now, knight takes b3. And again, c takes b3 is not advisable because this d3 pawn just becomes chronically weak. So a takes b3 was played. But now we actually see that the knight on b4 actually can stay on b4 for quite a while. And this is, I think, one of the subtle points of this line, is that the knight on b4 just hitting at the pawn on c2, and the queen has to sort of stay there protecting it. Because if it leaves from the defense of the c2 pawn, then there's this nasty fork on c2. So I think black has pretty decent compensation here because that knight on b4 is so well placed, and the bishop on b7 is also very well placed on the long diagonal. Now the bishop on e7 definitely could use some work, but well, there's time to improve. And here Carlsen made a very, very standard move in these structures. Actually, when I was talking to a friend that was watching the game with me at the site, I was like, yeah, c5, very standard move. And the point is you don't want to have, you want to sort of control the d4 square. It's important that you don't allow white to actually play d4 because then the c pawn might be a little bit backward. But more importantly than that, it's also just to not have any particular weaknesses. So, and c5 is connected very closely with the next move because after c5, knight e4 was played, trying to move the knight away from the c3 square and maybe think about white playing c3 and harassing the knight because the knight on b4 is so well placed. But also the reason knight a4 is so effective is because it blocks the bishop's scope on the long diagonal. If bishop takes e4 is played and it wasn't, after rook takes e4, white is just a clear pawn up for nothing really. And so it's very effective that the knight is blocking the bishop's diagonal. But here's the thematic move that I was talking about. That's about right here, right now, this f6 move. And the point is, you might say, why push your f-pawn? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's weakening the diagonal of the king on g8. And the reason you make this move is because, first of all, there's no more light-squared bishop for black. So you're not so worried about, there's no light-squared bishop for white, so you're not so worried about that diagonal being exploited. Second of all, black can't actually afford to have the e5 knight stay there. As I was saying before, if white is able to consolidate with a knight on e5 and a bishop on f4, it might spell trouble because it's just white has too much space and control of the center with the pieces. And so you have to push white back. And finally, black would love to connect the rooks. And the most natural square for most natural way for the rooks to be connected is a queen move to the 7th rank. But queen c7 is not encouraged because of knight g6 ideas. And so the queen would really love to go to d7. And because of that, the knight on e5 has to go. So f6 is a really, really standard move, and probably a difficult move to see for the average player, but it's totally in line with the structure. And also, I failed to mention this, but this is also important. The f6 pawn does a great job of actually blunting white's dark squared bishop a little bit, because now the squares g5 and e5 are also just off limits. So the knight went back to f3, and then I was saying, okay, white's up a pawn, but black has decent compensation and can probably connect the rooks with a move like queen d7. And my gosh, was I mistaken, because Carlsen had something totally different in mind. f5. When I saw this f5 move, I was like, what is this guy doing? Why does this makes no sense? You're just weakening the whole e-file. You're weakening this e5 square unnecessarily. Now e6 is weak as well, because the f7 pawn left moved to f5 and it's not covering e6 anymore. And I just thought the whole e-file is weak. But luckily for the audience, I'm not the one playing the World Championship. It is Magnus Carlsen, and he actually had a very, very nice idea here. Now, here's the point. After knight e5, which is really the most natural move, eyeing the e6 square, and this happened, now black took on g5, bishop takes g5. And here I was also surprised. I was like, why bishop takes g5? Well, here's the point. If knight takes g5 was played, but if bishop takes g5, now you'd actually have bishop takes f3. And this would actually be just better for black all of a sudden, because if queen takes e3, queen takes g5, and the bishop would be hanging. Conversely, if bishop takes d8, bishop takes d1, and now here black is also winning because he's going to get 2 pieces for the rook after a move like bishop e7, bishop takes c2, bishop takes f8, king takes f8. Now black just has 2 pieces for the rook and in a winning position. So bishop takes g5 is just out of the question. Now after knight takes g5, here is the idea, h6. And surprisingly enough, the knight doesn't have a really convenient square to go to. Now knight f3 would be the most natural move to play, just retreating it back there. But now bishop takes f3 would come, and queen takes f3 would be an impossible move because knight takes c2 and that fork. Remember before that queen on d1 had to protect the c2 pawn because the knight was so strong on b4. So g takes f3 would have to be played after bishop takes f3, and here only black can be better because these double pawns on the queen side are on the king side are just very weak and make the king a very weak king. So I can already imagine a move like queen h4 coming, and already it's very difficult to defend the king side. If king g2, for instance, already rook f6. Oh, excuse me, actually the bishop on f4 is also hanging. So yeah, there's really not much you can do here. I mean, okay, bishop d6, we'll say, attacking the rook and protecting the bishop. Then rook f6, and now you already have to worry about rook g6 check, among other things. And it would just spell disaster. So really, this h6 move is really clever. And so knight f3 is sort of out of the question. And now knight e6 was played. And this is all forced, too, which is great. Carlsen is sort of way into his preparation and hasn't had to make many moves on his own at all. And now here's the piece, is that there's this fork here on d8 and f8. But black has a very, very clever move here that gets out of the fork and creates his own threats, and that's queen d5. And now all of a sudden, mate on g2 is threatened. So really, really just a fantastic piece of preparation here by by Magnus. Really, really great and impressive. And it should be pointed out that f3, which was played, can just be met by rook fe8. And it's amazing, walking into this family fork on c7 causes no problems. Because if knight c7 now, you actually have rook takes e1, check, queen takes, and, well, you have knight. Well, even better than rook takes c1, I'm going to back up. If you start with queen d4 check, and then the king has to move to h1, then rook takes d1, queen takes d1, and queen takes f4, and here's another position where black would just be winning, because you just get 2 pieces for the rook at worst after a move like knight takes a8, and then there's also knight takes c2 coming, and there's just too many threats here. So really, after rook fe8, knight c7 is just sort of out of the question. There's some computer lines that sort of show that white can hold on after knight c7, but they're computer lines for a reason. They're really not feasible lines for the human to go down because there's too many avenues of danger. And here Karjakin thought for a while, and as he said in the press conference, he was actually very, very fortunate to have his next move, rook e5. Because without this rook e5 move, white would just be better. And the idea behind rook e5 is actually you attack the queen, you dislodge it from the d5 square, and more importantly than that, this queen d4 check is still impossible because the knight is still on e6. And so queen e5 is just an effective save, and essentially equalizes the game and forces a drawish ending. And this happens after queen d6, black backing up the queen. Then we saw c3, attacking this knight. And now rook takes e6. It's important to note here that other moves don't make so much sense. A move like knight takes d3. Why does knight takes d3 not work? I think it fails to rook e3. And the point is that this pin now against the queen is very annoying because the bishop is protected by the knight, and now the rook retreating attacks the knight on d3, and the knight can't move because the queen is pinned and attacked simultaneously. So now knight takes d3 is impossible, and so now you have to take this knight on e6. And after rook takes e6, rook takes e6, queen takes, c takes b4, c takes b4, the dust is settled, and even though Carlsen had fantastic preparation, there's not much to do here because of the presence of the opposite-colored bishops. Now, typically, with opposite-colored bishops and other pieces on the board, it's still a complicated game. But the issue here is that there aren't very many open files for the rooks to deal with right now. And so after the rooks come off, then it's pretty much a dead draw because the queen and the bishop aren't enough to... The queen alone is not enough to offset the opposite-colored bishop's balance. So after rook c1, black just played rook c8, trading those rooks, and also the material is equal. So rook takes c8, queen takes c8, and there's really not much to do here besides make it to move 30, because the Sophia rules are in effect and they can't have draws move 30. But beyond that, there's just not much life yet left in the position. So queen takes c8 was played, queen e1, hitting the b4 pawn, but queen d7, not really saying it's not a really big deal. You could take the b4 pawn. If you take the b4 pawn, I'll take the d3 pawn. So king h2, again, doesn't change the character of the position. It's just a little bit of prophylaxis, you could say, tucking the king away so it's away from checks. a5 just protects the b4 pawn. Queen e3, bishop d5, queen b6. Very accurate move. Essentially, just getting one of these pawns for the b3 pawn so that you don't have a 3 versus 1 situation to defend on the queen side. Bishop takes b3, queen takes a5, queen takes d3, queen takes b4, bishop e6. Again, it's tough to sort of annotate these moves because they're just trading pieces and it's getting closer to the draw. And here they actually agreed. But I thought there would be something like queen d6 played, just so they would show after queen takes, bishop takes, that it'd be truly a draw. But they agreed here. And so, yeah, the game was very quick. They didn't make the time control. It was sort of a change from the previous games they had played. And yeah, it was a bit disappointing simply because you go to the event and you're hoping when you actually go to the event, you're hoping for a long game, but you also go and you pay to sort of be around the atmosphere, which is great. You're around a bunch of chess enthusiasts. There are people playing blitz. There are people talking about the game, and that's important too. So I really enjoyed myself actually, in spite of the short game and the draw. From Carlsen's perspective, it's got to be considered a win because you're playing the first of 2 black games in a row, and ultimately you just want to hold. It's really important to hold and not lose with black. So Carlsen did his job. He had fantastic preparation, and Karjakin never really had a chance to cause black any problems. That said, you would like to see Sergey do a little something with white, a little something that would be a little bit exciting with white. I'm shocked that d4 hadn't been played yet by him. I've said before, his seconds, specifically Vladimir Potkin and Shakh Mamedyarov, are both d4 players, or non-e4 players primarily. So I was expecting at some point d4 opening, but he must be saving it for later. That's my only guess. So, in any case, thanks for tuning in, and I'll have more commentary soon. Take care.